we said we are in James chapter 3. We're going to be picking up
around verse 7. We'll back up just a little bit, do a little bit of review over what Reuben had gone over some last week. We won't go all the way back to the beginning of chapter 3, but we'll do a little bit of review. If you're following along in the book that we have, we'll be about page 112 if you're following along in the book there. And so we've been speaking for 2 or 3 weeks in chapter 3, and we have been kind of focusing on the tongue and some of the evils as well as some of the good things that can be done with the tongue. And the title that we have up on the board, up on the screen, is The Untamable Tongue. And we spent a little bit of time last week looking at how the tongue is we're not able to tame our tongue. It is untamable. And so let's go ahead and we'll read verses 7 through 12 to kind of get the context of what we are talking about here. And I plan to go, like I said, go over a little bit of review a little bit of what Reuben did last week, and then we'll finish up this lesson pretty quickly, I believe, unless there's some comments or something. I feel like we'll move through the last part of this lesson pretty quickly and then hopefully get into the next lesson. But if you'd like to follow along in James chapter 3, beginning with verse 7, it says, "For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men, who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh." And so here we see, again, as we've said, the tongue cannot be tamed, but it must be controlled. So a tongue out of control is something that is full of deadly poison. We read there in verse 7, "For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind." And so we see that men can tame every species of beast, but no one can tame the tongue. But what we need to understand is that it can be controlled. Even though we cannot tame our tongue, we do have the ability to control our tongue in certain aspects. David prayed in Psalms chapter 141 and verse 3. It says, "Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips." And so here, David recognized this fact that the tongue is something that he was not able to tame. And so he's asking God to help him set a guard over his mouth, to keep a watch over his lips. Ephesians 4 and verse 29, it says, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers." And so here again in Ephesians, we're being instructed to set this guard over our tongues, over our mouths, so that only good things will proceed from our mouths, not corrupt things, not evil things, not vulgar things, but the things that are good for and necessary for edification. And so we need to control, to the best of our ability, this untamable thing so that only good comes from that. Colossians 4 and verse 6 says, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one." And so here again, he's reiterating the fact that we need to control our tongue so that only good things proceed from our mouths. If the tongue is left unguarded, if we do not guard our tongue, if we become lax in how we are controlling or trying to guard our tongue, one moment we can say something, and those things, as we've said before, are impossible to bring back. And so this is why it's so necessary for us to make a conscious effort every day, at all times, when we're communicating with one another, that we need to be setting this guard on our tongue so that we make sure that the things that are being said are things that are edifying and things of that nature. And so again, I think we've kind of hinted with this just a little bit earlier, but I think this would even extend in our society to maybe not necessarily only what we say, but maybe a lot of times what we type. Because a lot of our communication now is done through either texting, it's done through social media and things of that nature. And so, once we hit that send button or enter button or we post that, a lot of people can see it a lot of times. And so we need to guard our tongues in that area as well, not just what we verbally speak, but the words that we are using to communicate with others, I think would go right along with what we are studying here. And so a lot of times we can do much more damage with a keystroke than we could just verbally saying things. And so we need to be sure we guard our tongue, when we actually are using our tongue, but the words that we are speaking, the things that we are communicating. I think this is the idea that James is trying to put across to us in this chapter, is just controlling the way we communicate. Reuben went over this a little bit last week. We were looking at the difference in tamed and controlled. And I think it's an interesting thing to kind of consider here. When you look at what is tame, it's no longer wild, it's domesticated. And he used the example of a dog that someone has trained to maybe stay on the other side of the road or a good distance from their master. And then, they're sitting there and that they want to run, but they're tamed to the point where they will stay put until its masters call them. And I've seen other videos where, somebody will put a treat or something on the nose of a dog, and, he's wanting to eat that, but it's just saliva and everything's just running out of his mouth, but he holds off until he gets that command, and then he pops it up and swallows it. And that's taming, but our tongues will never be able to be to that point. And so we're going to have to guard those. We're going to have to control those in some way. And so this idea of controlling something is to have authority over and to set boundaries in whatever way possible so that it doesn't get out of control. I was thinking about something or maybe an analogy that we could use that most of us probably would be familiar with or at least have seen. And, what comes to mind for me would be maybe a bull. A lot of times, many of you maybe have raised cattle. I haven't personally raised cattle, but I grew up next door to my great uncle who did. He was in the cattle business. And so a lot of times we would be out and we would jump his fences. We would go down, to his ponds to fish and things like that. And I can remember on several occasions they would say, "Hey, there's a bull in that pasture. You don't need to go in that one." And so, there was this bull, this animal that was not tame, that was out of control in a lot of ways. And so, we had to be cautious around that. But you think about how do you control a bull? Well, you have to build a sturdy fence to keep it inside. Maybe, some bulls maybe even have to have a hot wire around it so that when it gets close, it's going to give it that shock to keep it where you want it to stay. I know George built a catch pen in his pasture back when he was raising cattle, and I remember him showing that to me, and it's still there, but used a lot of metal, a lot of heavy lumber, and his reasoning was, I don't want anyone to get hurt when we are trying to load these cattle. And so he went what many people would consider above what was necessary, but to him the safety of the people that were dealing with those cattle was very important. And so he built this beefed up catch pen so that once these things got corralled in there wasn't really any way, if you were where you were supposed to be, you're not going to get hurt because the area that he had built was able to control those big, large beasts that could do a lot of damage. And so that's the idea that we need to have with our tongue. We need to be building this strong corral, these guards against the things that we are saying, against the things that we are typing, so that we do not let that thing get out of control. Because verse 8, as we said, but no man can tame the tongue, It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. And so like a serpent, the tongue is always ready to pour out deadly poison at any moment. You know, we have to guard our tongue because at any moment something might happen, somebody might say something to us, and before we know it, we're spewing poison. A bit choice of gossip, once started, picks up momentum. And we all know that every time this gossip is being told to another person, it changes. A lot of times it gets worse. And within just a very short amount of time, you've started something that is really hard to control there. It obtains added fuel with each retelling, and so it's adding poison to the poison. And so the entire cycle of giving birth to sin is ignited by this single spark, by this single slip of the tongue, and we're not able to get that back because we started that in a moment of weakness. Any comments or anything anybody would like to add there? As we've seen, the tongue is an indicator of the heart. And so a lot of times what's spewing out of our mouth, or not a lot of times, but all the times, what is coming out of our mouth is an indicator of what's in our heart. And so if we're spewing these evil things, these bad things, then we understand that what is inside is evil and is bad. Verse 9 of chapter 3, it says, With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. And so out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. We see this in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 34. And so since the tongue indicates the true nature of one's heart, it is inconsistent to praise God and with the same tongue curse his children who are created in his image. And so we don't need to pretend to praise God, but yet curse our brothers and sisters or curse our fellow man. That is just inconsistent, and that's hypocritical for us to do so. In 1 John chapter 4, verses 20 and 21, it says there, if someone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? And this commandment we have from him, that he who loves God must also love his brother. And so this is a requirement for us. If we truly love God, we are going to love our brothers and sisters. This is not an option. For he who loves God must love his brother. And so we cannot praise God with our mouth and then turn around and curse our brothers and sisters. And we cannot hate them in that manner. Any comments or anything along those lines?
That is back to what you said about what we communicate with our mouth or what we communicate with our fingers.
Yeah.
It all comes from the heart.
It all comes from the heart. It really does. And, there's so much negativity, so much animosity, and so much poison being spewed by people when they type. And I guess it's because you have that separation where you're not actually seeing that person. But those words have the same effect. They can ignite this person into a rage, or then you prompt them to sin themselves as they start spewing the stuff back. But all of this is coming from the heart. And so we need to make sure that we control those things. Anything else?
I think that gets back to the point he was making in verse 2 about if he doesn't stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man able to follow the whole body as well. Because the mind controls it all.
Yeah, it does. Good point. Any other comments?
Shane, I heard a little story the other day. Preacher at the church called one of the ladies in the church. She was at home, sick, I guess, so the story goes. And she picks up, and she doesn't realize it's him. She just lays in on him, really good. And then she figured out it was him. Of course, her voice and what she was saying had changed. So,
Yeah.
I guess that ties into this this here.
Yeah, we may all have, especially before we had caller ID, we might have done that a good bit. But we need to guard that no matter who we're speaking to. Any other comments? All right, as we move on, verse 10 says, out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing, my brethren, these things ought not to be so. And so what we understand is that slander and talebearing drive a wedge of division in the church, and it destroys a proper relationship with God. If we also attempt to climb the ladder of success by stepping on the rungs of the spoiled reputations of our fellow men, we only deceive ourselves. And so a lot of times we see people who do that, especially in a secular environment, in a business environment. A lot of people try to achieve success by destroying their competition with, trying to destroy their reputation. Say, why that's bad, or what they've done is bad. And we see this a lot of times if you're in business and maybe you have a salesman come up, and, with us, a lot of times it's chemicals and fertilizer and things like that. And so no matter who it is, the current fertilizer that we're using is just not any good. It's bad. It's terrible. You need to be using mine because that's going to do this. It's not going to do that. And so, I've never had a salesman come in that didn't try to put down or destroy the fertilizer that I'm using. And and we don't really need to do that. We don't really need to do that. We need to, if we can't advance ourselves on our own merits, we need to just go back to the drawing board and look at those things. And so, maybe we can do a better job, but let's watch. Let's be careful with how we try to promote things like that. I think there's nothing wrong with going in and letting somebody know what you can do. This is what I'm able to do for you. But when we start trying to put down the competition, start trying to, ruin the reputation of those we are trying to advance above, I think we need to be very, very careful in when we do that, because we can, it leads us down a very dangerous road there in what we are doing. So, let's try to, as we advance in anything, try to do so on our own merits, and not necessarily by trying to destroy, what other people are doing or put them down. Any comments or anything along those lines?
Shane, how should we, when we run into situations like that, and I've seen it a few times over the years and time past, where, let's say somebody steals somebody's idea, like it's theirs.
Yeah.
I mean, should we just turn the other cheek on that and let it go, or?
I guess, a lot of times I guess it would be about a situational basis there. If we have an idea and there maybe is a legal recourse for us to do that, I'm not saying that we might not be able to go down that road. Now, I definitely believe we don't need to take our brother to court, but there may be some legal things that we might be able to do, or it might just be a situation where we just let that go. It might be better to do that. And so, I think it would be hard to say in a general way, what we might be able to do there. So,
I've seen that, and I've experienced myself some, not on a big major deal, but at the time it was important, and I just let it go, and I've learned, and we know this. You reap what you sow, and usually that comes back around.
Yeah, and true. A lot of times, greatness or goodness, eventually it's going to show. If someone comes in and they're dealing underhandedly, and it may take a while, but eventually, people are going to figure out who they are and what they are. And I think we've all of us with any age have probably seen this, where someone's true colors eventually show through. And I think we've all dealt with that. And so we just need to, be honest, truthful, kind, and ultimately, that really shows. And we may never reach the top of our profession or anything like that, but that really doesn't matter. In the end, we'll have friends, we'll have people who care about us, and that's more important. And so whether it's in the business world or, even the things that we are talking about could happen right here in this congregation, where you have maybe one person trying to advance himself over another, so that, they could be a class teacher or the song leader or maybe even the preacher, things like that. And so they start trying to tear down these other people in order to advance themselves. And it can go in a lot of different directions. It doesn't even have to be some sort of public situation that they're trying to put themselves in. It could be something behind the scenes. And so here you have these factions. He's starting this one faction to try to get something going that he really wants. And so he's trying to tear down these other people. And so we need to be very careful that we are not using our tongues to do that. And, because how can we bless God and curse our brethren? Any other comments there?
Philippians 2, verses 3 through 4, let nothing be done from selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interests of others. This starts out as a heart issue.
Yeah.
If our heart's not right, we can use our tongue to do the exact opposite of what's being taught here, like your example with the fertilizer.
Yeah. And we see these things a lot in politics too. On a local level, I've seen people say, I'm not going to run a smear campaign. I'm not going to go there. But, a lot of times, what do they eventually do? They eventually start talking about their competitor there. And so we need to just be very careful in anything that we do when we're trying to promote ourselves or advance ourselves. And we're looking to others before we look to ourselves.
I know a lot of y'all do not drive a Chevrolet GM brand, but
Yeah. There's a lot of loyalty there sometimes. I won't mention any names. All right, any other comments? All right, verse 11 says, Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? So just as sweet water and salt water do not both come from the same fountain, neither can a man love God and hate his brother. 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. And so certainly serving God, loving God means that we love everyone, and that everything we do is we do with love. And when we discipline our children, we do so with love. When we go and speak to our brother about maybe something that he is doing or has done that is wrong, we do so with love. When we teach a class, when we preach a lesson, when we're talking with other people, everything needs to be done with love, because that is how we show that we love God. And so something is seriously wrong if a person claims to be a sincere believer, but yet his speech reflects, another attitude, this unloving speech. And this is hard to do a lot of times. It's difficult to do when someone maybe cuts you off in line at the grocery store. Thatcher and I were in a situation yesterday where we were in a very crowded store, and someone comes up and he thought he was in line first, and so the cashier, they really wanted to check us out, but I'm like, no, you go ahead and check him out. And she says, no, you were here first, but it made the guy mad, and he storms out. We need to show love no matter where we're at. I mean, there was a very crowded store, and I was, I wanted to try to be patient, because I know I did, mainly I was wanting to do it for for the workers' benefit, because I know what it's like to be in those situations. And so a lot of people, they have issues with things like that. Maybe somebody cuts you off in traffic or pulls out in front of you. And you know, oftentimes we're laying on the horn, we're shouting, we're throwing up our fist or something like that. And but we never really know what that person's going through. Maybe they just received some bad news. Maybe a loved one has passed away. Maybe they've got issues going on at home. And so, you know, maybe if we approach that in a loving manner, you know, we can help that person, or at least at the very least, keep from making their situation even worse. And so we cannot, you know, come in here on Sundays and you know, sing about love and talk about love, and then leave out of here, and the rest of the week, you know, approach everybody with this in this bitter manner, and just, you know, just very quick to speak and quick to call attention to what we feel is unfair, how we're being treated unfairly, and things like that. And we need to approach these things with love, and maybe oftentimes not jump to conclusions and think the worst of a situation, but maybe consider other things as far as you know, what they might be going through. Any comments along those lines? So as we conclude this lesson in verse 12, it says, "Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear fruits? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh." And so hypocrisy is easily identified by actions. And so we've all seen this, where someone says one thing, but yet they do another. And they're saying that they're going to go above and beyond, or do, you know, help us out or whatever, and then it never follows through, and they're being hypocritical, and they talk about how great they are and how much good they're doing and how much they love their brothers and sisters and love God, but yet we don't see the actions that back that up. The fruit is not there. They're not bearing the fruit that they're trying to deceive us into thinking that they are bearing. We just don't see it. They're like a grapevine that's trying to tell everybody it's an olive tree, but we don't see any olives. All we see is grapes. And so we have to bear that fruit in order to back up what we are saying with our mouths. Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 through 20, it says, "You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits, you will know them." And so one may claim that he loves God, but if his fruit proves otherwise, we understand this person is a liar. You know, we can call a fig tree by another name, but that does not make it a different tree. You know, it doesn't make it a lemon tree. You know, we can call a fig tree a lemon tree, but that doesn't make it a lemon tree. Because once we see that fruit, we know it's a fig. We know it's a fig because we know that the fruit that is bearing is not lemons. And you know, these type of trees don't bear two different types of fruit. So just like this, we can tell the type of person, what type of person someone is by the fruit that they are bearing. If they're out on the ground, as Rodney says a lot of times, out here, you know, trying to, you know, in the trenches, trying to help and do things for others. You know, they're there not when there's a big crowd where they can be seen, but they're there in the middle of the night, or at some point where they're doing the dirty work. You know that person is a person of love, and they're really loving the person or the people that they're helping, because they're doing it not for show, but they're doing it because it needs to be done. And so when we see that type of fruit, we know what type of person we are dealing with. When we see someone who is wronged in some way, but yet they take it meekly. They you know, they're not mad about it. They try to be kind. They try to maybe diffuse a situation in some, you know, we at that point we know that person is a person of love. You know, we know what type of person they are. They're not out for their own good. They're looking out for the good of others. And so the fruit that we bear definitely shows what type of person we are. All right, any other comments or anything before we move on to the next lesson? We don't have a lot of time, but we might can kind of dip our toe in it a little bit, but I'm open to any comments. Yes, Rodney.
You know, this passage and most all, I was kind of thinking, was there an instance? Every time we're told that we do sin, a lot of brethren take that to mean that we have to sin.
Yeah.
But no, in every instance, I mean, in the exact passage where he says, don't, or you do, he says, well, but don't.
Yeah.
You know, and so this idea of not being able to tame it, it's suggestive that we're human. That's not what that means at all. God is just identifying a very serious problem with that mouth if you don't, like you pointed out, control it. Yeah. But a spring don't spit out both. See, Christians don't do both. So as long as we're trusting in God, doing what's right, praying, all that, we won't ever sin. It's when we
stop doing those things.
Guard down, and that's really what all the passages suggest. You know, that not the wife depart, but if she departs, but he said, don't depart though. You know, so you a lot of them depart, but they don't have to depart. And that's all the way through the Bible. That none of these weaknesses is suggesting that we have to yield to them.
Yeah, I mean, how many times do we yield to temptation when we're praying, or when we're studying, or when we're meditating on God's word? You know, how many times do we sin when we're doing those things? It's when we sin is when we're not doing those things. And so, you know, we don't have to give in to those temptations, but you know, oftentimes we fail and we do, but that's not because we have to. Any other comments?
Shane, I think Rodney's comments very, very good. I think a lot of times when we read a passage or study a passage like this, people look at this as an excuse to do the very thing that it condemns. And you pointed out very well that it's not giving us an excuse, it's telling us this is a danger, we need to avoid the danger. We can avoid the danger if we do what's right. Yeah. And so I really appreciate him adding that to the class.
And, you know, a lot of people, especially when it comes to the tongue, they try to excuse themselves by saying, well, that's just the way I am. That's my personality. You know, I'm gonna say it like that because that's my personality. And they use that as an excuse to kind of get a get out jail free card. Just by, that's just who I am. You're going to have to deal with it. But you don't have to be that way. You can control your tongue. You can tame it, or not tame it, but you can control it, keep it under control. And you don't have to be unloving in the things that you're saying and your attitudes. Good comments, good points. Anything else? Okay, we'll just kind of set the stage a little bit for our lesson next week as we begin looking at heavenly wisdom versus earthly wisdom. And so let's just go ahead and we'll read those few verses there, the remainder of chapter 3, and kind of set the stage there for our study next week. It says, Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good works, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. And so here, we've compared, someone who uses his tongue properly with someone who doesn't use his tongue properly. And so a lot of that goes back to someone who has heavenly wisdom versus someone who is relying on earthly wisdom. And so, of course, when we're trying to compare the wisdom that we are being presented with, maybe it's advice that someone is giving us, or just even our own wisdom, what we need to be looking at again is the fruit that the wisdom is bearing. And so a lot of times, you look at the earthly wisdom, and we'll study these things, Lord willing, in more detail, but we're looking at something that's earthly, that's sensual, that's demonic, where there's evil, envy, self-seeking, confusion, all of those things. If we see that sort of fruit being born by the wisdom that we are trying to employ, or the wisdom that someone else is trying to employ, then we know that that's earthly wisdom. But yet, if we see, these good fruits, this wisdom that doesn't produce partiality, that doesn't produce hypocrisy, but peace and things along that nature, and love, then we know that this wisdom is from heaven. And so what we understand is that, the wise teacher needs the proper attitude. He needs the proper type of wisdom. And so the wise teacher, the wise person, will show wisdom in the way that they live their life. And so it's not only about standing up here and telling everyone what they need to do, but yet it's about someone living the things that they are teaching. And so he begins with a question, who is wise and understanding among you? And so he raises this question here in verse 13. And I don't think the question is raised because one could not be found. He's not saying, well, there's not one here. Who can find somebody like, he just can't be found. I don't think that's what he's raising. Instead, it's a challenge to those he is speaking to examine themselves. And this self-examination that will separate the truly spiritual person from those who are hypocrites. And so this is a challenge to examine ourselves so that we can fully understand whether the wisdom that we are trying to employ in our life is heavenly or earthly, because there's a huge difference. As we have studied the preceding verses, discussing the importance of keeping the tongue under control, everyone needs these admonitions. Well, everyone needs the admonitions that we are talking about here when it comes to wisdom. This admonition applies to all disciples, but as a teacher, the teacher needs to especially be on guard with the type of wisdom that he's trying to employ, because the teacher has greater influence over the people that he's trying to teach. Any comments or anything along those lines? So we understand that the influence that a teacher wields over those whom he is teaching has led some to be lifted up in pride, lifted up in the pride of their position and the things, in this position they have to stand in front of people maybe, or to lead a group of people in what they are doing. With selfish ambition, they have used their talent to draw people to themselves rather than to God. And so this is what we definitely don't want to fall into the trap of doing, trying to draw someone to ourselves personally. Our goal as a teacher, as someone trying to communicate these things to others, is to draw others closer to God, not to ourselves. It's not about us, it's about leading them to God. Acts chapter 20, verses 29 through 30, He says, "For I know this, that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. Also from among yourselves, men will rise up, speaking perverse things, to draw away the disciples after themselves." And so here we have, Paul stating that he knows that others are going to come in. They're going to start drawing people to themselves, not to God, to themselves. And so as a teacher, as someone trying to communicate these things to others, we need to be sure that we put the emphasis on God and not ourselves, our ability, our charisma, or anything along those lines, that we keep God in the utmost or in the forefront of what we are saying and what we are doing. I appreciate everyone's attention, those who participated. Thank you so much for your comments. Lord willing, next week we'll pick back up here in verse 13, and we'll continue on with this lesson. So thank you so much.